All right, let's dive into one of America's oldest and, let's be honest, most complicated relationships, the one it has with alcohol. I mean, from the moment the first ships landed to the microbrew you might have in your fridge right now, drinking has been this constant but super contradictory force in the nation's history. So let's get into it.
This is really the core paradox of alcohol itself, isn't it? It can be a poison or it can be a medicine. It brings people together for celebrations, but it can also tear them apart. It's a social lubricant, and it's a dangerous depressant. This tension, this push and pull, is right at the heart of America's story with drinking.
So for this explainer, we're going to look at alcohol as more than just a beverage. Think of it as a cultural artifact. Because how Americans have made it, drank it, and maybe most importantly, fought over it, well, that tells us an incredible amount about who they were and who we are today.
And what's really fascinating is how this conflict plays out even in the way we study it. On one side, you've got scholars who look at it as a social problem, focusing on addiction, health issues, all the negative stuff. But on the other side, you have this normal drinking approach, which looks at how alcohol builds communities and creates rituals. And America has always struggled to balance these two very different views.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning. Because you simply cannot understand the founding of the United States without getting just how central alcohol was. This was not a luxury item, not at all. It was an absolute necessity.
I mean, just look at this list. Alcohol was basically the Gatorade, the Advil, and the stock market of its day all rolled into one. Water was often unsafe to drink, so alcohol made it potable. It was the main painkiller before we had modern medicine. And economically, it was huge. You could take your extra grain, distill it into whiskey, and suddenly it was way easier to transport and sell. And taverns, those were the original social networks, the place where politics happened.
But here's the thing. The colonists had to adapt. Their beloved European grapevines just wouldn't grow in the new climate. So what did they do? They turned to what they had. That meant apples for hard cider and, most importantly, corn. And this is what led to a uniquely American spirit, corn-based whiskey, which, you guessed it, would eventually become bourbon. It's a perfect example of an old-world tradition becoming a brand new American identity.
And this just goes to show that the fight over alcohol started almost immediately. As early as 1654, Massachusetts was already trying to control who could make it. Then, fast forward to 1791, the brand new U.S. government slaps a tax on whiskey, and what happens? Just 3 years later, you get the Whiskey Rebellion. And that 1802 law, that's a really early and pretty dark sign of how alcohol would be used to control different cultural groups.
All right, now we're jumping into the 19th and early 20th centuries, and this is when all those simmering tensions just explode into an all-out culture war. The temperance movement wasn't just about getting people to stop drinking. It was a battle for the very soul of the nation.
Now, a huge factor here was immigration. Think about it. Every new group that arrived brought their own drinking culture with them. The Irish brought whiskey, the Germans brought their beer gardens, the Italians brought their tradition of wine with meals. And to the folks already there, mostly of British descent, these customs felt, well, foreign and even threatening.
This quote just says it all, doesn't it? Drinking habits became a stand-in for xenophobia. The temperance movement was really fueled in a big way by suspicion of these new Americans. What was a totally normal social custom for an Italian or German immigrant was twisted into a sign of moral failure by the temperance folks.
And you can just see the momentum building for nearly 100 years. It started small with societies back in the 1820s, but then it grew into these massive political forces like the Women's Christian Temperance Union and the Anti-Saloon League. I mean, these groups were incredibly organized, and by 1919, they got what they wanted, the 18th Amendment.
But of course, we all know how that noble experiment turned out. It was a spectacular failure. It didn't stop people from drinking, not even close. It just pushed the whole industry underground, which created a massive black market and basically handed the keys to organized crime. The thirst was definitely still there.
So after Prohibition was repealed in 1933, America basically had to start from scratch. It had to figure out a whole new way to live with alcohol. This next era is all about building this complex web of laws, social rules, and new public health campaigns, all trying to manage our very contradictory thirst. So what did this new framework actually look like? Well, first, you have the repeal in 33. Then comes federal regulation to try and manage the industry. And then in 1935, something totally new emerges. Alcoholics Anonymous, a completely different approach to addiction.
And really crucially, a lot of the control got kicked down to the states and local counties, which is why we still have dry counties in parts of the U.S. today.
In the back half of the 20th century, the whole fight shifted. It moved from the saloon to the driver's seat. The rise of Mothers Against Drunk Driving, or MAD, was just a phenomenally successful campaign. It totally changed our social norms, making the designated driver a common term, and eventually leading to a national blood alcohol limit.
And of course, there's this number, 21. The National Minimum Drinking Age Act of 1984 basically made every state raise its drinking age to 21. It's one of the most visible and most debated pieces of alcohol law in modern America.
But okay, let's step away from the laws and the health campaigns for a second. What about the actual places where people drink? While saloons were the big bad guys for the temperance movement, they've also historically been sanctuaries, really important community hubs for people who are often shut out of other parts of public life.
And this is just so important to understand. Sure, bars could be places of segregation, enforcing those racial lines, but they were also places where those very boundaries were challenged. Women fought for the right to drink in male-only bars, claiming their space in public. And for the LGBTQ+ community, bars were often the only safe place to gather. That's exactly why the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar, became the birthplace of the modern gay rights movement. The protests started in a sanctuary.
So, when you step back and look at the whole picture, from the creation of bourbon on the frontier to the secret speakeasies of Prohibition, from the rise of MAD to the invention of beer bongs in college dorms, alcohol has been a constant mirror. It reflects America's biggest conflicts, its incredible diversity, and its ongoing, and yeah, often contradictory, search for who it is.
And this journey just keeps going, with every bottle that's opened and every glass that's raised. Which brings us to a final thought. Whether it's a craft beer, a glass of wine, or a fancy cocktail, that drink in your hand connects you to this long, complicated, and deeply American story. So what does your next drink say about you and about the culture you're a part of?